Dr. Kate Lepis, who will be presenting Ecological Gardening, Landscapes that Function Aesthetically and Ecologically. Kate studied wildlife biology at the University of Rhode Island, but fell in love with plants when she took a field botany course. She has been a dedicated plant nerd ever since. After graduation, she began her career in horticulture by working with a local landscape designer and completing 2 certificate programs from the New York Botanical Garden in field botany and commercial horticulture. She earned a Ph.D. in plant biology with a focus on plant systematics, and Rutgers. Throughout this journey, her focus has been learning as much as possible about the use of native plants in the landscape. Currently, Kate is the horticulturist at Deep Cut Gardens, Monmouth County Parks. In April 2025, she joined the board of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey as the State Botanist. And now, without further ado, here's Kate.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for everybody for sharing your evening with me so that I can speak with you about how to make your landscapes function aesthetically and ecologically. I have to say that I grew up in Glen Rock, so being able to speak to people from Bergen County and Passaic County makes me really happy. So anyway, so let's get on to the topic. Um, there are two cornerstone ideas behind landscaping ecologically, and those include planting native and also gardening organically. I will not be profiling native species tonight. I simply don't have the time, and I feel like you can get that kind of information elsewhere. Um, but what I would like to do is go over with you what an ecosystem is, how it functions, and then give you management techniques that you can get your property to function ecologically too. The two cornerstone ideas, planting native and gardening organically, really go hand in hand. It can be said that one of the core differences between gardening conventionally and gardening organically is that in the conventional garden, problems are solved by eliminating species. And in the organic garden, problems are solved by promoting species. And since native plants support more life, the two of those really work synergistically. So let me start by explaining what an ecosystem is. An ecosystem has two main components. There's the living component, and of course, this is all of the life within the system. The plants, the animals, the protists, the fungi, the algae, the bacteria, and the viruses. And then there's the non-living component, which is basically just like the physical environment, the sunlight, the temperature, rock, space, the mineral component of the soil, rain, snow, pH. So the pH of the soil or the pH of the water, all of this physical stuff. And in general, an ecosystem is defined by the interactions that take place between the living community and the interactions that take place between the organisms and their physical environment. So just let me explain this a little bit further in the next few slides, and then we'll talk about how you can get this working in your own yard. At the basis of all of this, of course, is photosynthesis. Plants, awesome superpower to make their own food. They take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, water out of the soil. They use, pardon me, they use the sun's energy to combine those two molecules, sort of like bake them together, if you will, to make sugar, um, and specifically to make glucose. And so a, one of the plant's major role in the ecosystem is to take the energy that they've harnessed from the sun and pass that along to the rest of the life in the system. You know, all life on the planet is living off of the sun's energy. When we walk, talk, our heart beats, we breathe, we blink, we jog down the street. All of this biological activity is fueled by the sun. And so, in a very real sense, plants' awesome superpower is to convert solar energy into calories, calories that the plants can use and calories that other life can use. Of course, animals can't make their own food. We simply don't have the DNA for it. We have to eat other things to access that energy. You could behave like a herbivore and eat the plants. You could behave like a carnivore and eat the animals that ate plants. And so, in a functioning ecosystem, the sun flows through the photosynthesizers to the herbivores, to the carnivores, and up to top predators. And so, in a functioning ecosystem, living things eat. And like I said, you could behave like a pipevine swallowtail caterpillar and eat like an herbivore. You could be a photosynthesizer if you were lucky enough. You could behave like a carnivore, like the eastern yellow jacket. You could behave like a parasite with the beautiful ghost pipes. In an ecosystem, living things need shelter, whether it's tricking plant tissue to form a gall around you, building your nest, or using a snag, the cavities within a snag as shelter. Um, a few 2 falls ago, the Native Plant Society Fall Conference, Basil Camus was one of the speakers. He did an awesome job. He is the owner of Leaf and Limb. I highly suggest you check out that leafandlimb.com website of his. But the New York Times wrote an article about him in 2024 because he owns a tree service that won't cut down dead trees. And I would argue that in the suburban environment, it's these species that require snags for shelter that are some of the biggest losers because we manage everything so much and get rid of all the snags and cut them down. 35 species of birds in the Northeast use snags as shelter. I was so pleasantly surprised to be able to take a picture of this snag right in Glen Rock. I suggest that if you have a tree that needs to come down in your yard, certainly take the top portion off that's dangerous, but leave as much as you safely can because it will really provide, it's such a valuable, valuable resource for so many other species. And of course, living things reproduce. And so it's this quest for these three basic things that drives the interactions that take place between species and between the living things and their physical environments. And like I said, an ecosystem is defined by the interactions that take place. You could think of an ecosystem like a car engine, and the species being the different parts of that engine. Except this engine doesn't run on gasoline, it runs on the interactions that are taking place within the system. Of course, if a species disappears from the community, which would be analogous to one of the parts breaking and maybe falling out of the engine, then this engine wouldn't run as well. It would affect the way it functions. You could also think of an ecosystem like a piece of woven fabric, and each species represented by a single strand. The more species, the more strands, the stronger and more resilient that ecosystem is. And the reason that we should care about the strength and the resiliency of the ecosystems around us is because they provide us with resources that we need for survival, like the filtration and storage of clean water, the filtration and production of clean air, production of fertile soil, and sustaining pollinators for our food crops, just to name a couple. I'm sure with this crowd, I don't need to go too deep into the differences between what is a native species and what is an exotic species. But I think I would like to say for the newcomers that probably the biggest factor in determining what is native and what is exotic is geological time. Because to earn the title of a native species, you need to have evolved with the living community for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. And exotic species just don't have that shared history. As things are interacting with each other over a geological time scale, those interactions develop into relationships. And those relationships mean that the living community is interdependent of each other. Some of the relationships can become very intimate, others more peripheral. But these exotic species, because they don't share that history, have a lack of interaction with the rest of the community. And if an ecosystem runs on the interactions of the living things with each other and with the physical environment, the problem with exotic species is that they lack interactions that fuel the ecosystem engine. If you're looking to buy plants or figure out what's native and what's not, I highly suggest this Bone app website. It provides maps for countless species in North America and tells you where they are native and where they are not. I will say that, especially if we're talking about exotic plant species, adding them into an ecosystem is like adding a plastic dummy part to the engine. It looks like a spark plug, but it doesn't generate any sparks. And if we're talking about an exotic invasive species, then that's even worse because not only does that species act like a plastic dummy part in the engine, but it spreads and it replaces functioning parts with more plastic dummy parts that don't help fuel the ecosystem engine. Now, I want to just go back a minute and talk a little bit more about the role of plants in the ecosystem as funneling the sun's energy through photosynthesis and making that life-giving energy available to the rest of the system. Of course, plants don't want to be doing that for us, no more than a gazelle wants to be eaten by a cheetah. And plants are not helpless. They have evolved an arsenal of chemical defenses that prevent herbivory. And we are very, very aware of some of those chemical defenses. And it takes, again, a geological time frame for herbivores to be able to evolve the ability to cancel out the toxins so that they can digest particular plant tissue. And again, the problem with non-native species is that our native herbivores have not spent enough time with them to uh, develop the ability to digest that tissue. And so if you were to replace a native species with, say, Japanese stilt grass, what you're really doing is you're breaking that relationship. You're blocking that flow of solar energy to the herbivores. And if you're blocking that flow of energy to the herbivores, then you're blocking the flow of energy to the carnivores and to the top predators. I'm sure everybody recognizes this plant here, Phragmites, in the front here. Phragmites is a species that is native to North America, and it's also native to Europe. And genetic analyses have confirmed that the invasive behavior of Phragmites is the result of the European type being introduced to North America during the colonial era. So let's just say the 1700s. Um, there are morphological ways that you can tell the native Phragmites from the European Phragmites. They're very minute details. Experts can use them. Most people don't know how to tell them apart. And sometimes you need genetic analyses to be sure. But the interesting and notable part about that is that people might have trouble identifying the difference between European Phragmites and native Phragmites, but the insect herbivores can tell the difference. Phragmites probably got introduced to this continent a good 300 years ago. And even within that 300 years, the European Phragmites does not support much life. You only find 5 species of native herbivores using European Phragmites in North America. If you compare that to the interactions that they have in their native environment, where they support 170 species in Europe, the difference between the two is astronomical. And so again, the problem with exotic plant species is that they do not contribute enough interactions to help fuel the ecosystem. And if we look at this map of a little bit of Bergen County, a little bit of Passaic County, we have Ridgewood and Glen Rock and Fairlawn and Paramus over here representing Bergen County. We have Hawthorne and Patterson and Halden and North Halden representing Passaic County in this view. And of course, I don't have to tell anybody, but we live in a human-dominated landscape. There are some islands of nature, tiny little reserves of open space in an otherwise sea of human development. And over the past century or so, what has happened is in this human development, people have decided to clear the natural community and replace that with houses and landscapes that they planted with species from other continents. And so if you look at a forest that exists in High Mountain Park Preserve, and I have to admit, I've never been there. But now, after preparing for this talk with you guys and doing a little research, it's definitely a place where I would like to go hiking. Um, Based on its size and based on the fact that it is home to several rare species, I'm assuming that it is in relatively good health. And so you would imagine that the forests within High Mountain Preserve would look something like this. And a forest in the temperate Northeast the broadleaf deciduous forest, if it's healthy, has 5 layers to it. It has the canopy layer, and this is made up of the tallest of trees, trees that grow to be 50, 70 feet tall, like your oaks and your beeches, your hickories and the like. And then there's the subcanopy. And this is made up of younger trees or trees like dogwoods and musselwoods, things along those lines that maybe just max out at like 20 to 30 feet tall. And then there's the shrub layer. So, of course, your native rhododendrons and mountain laurel, witch hazel, and things along those lines. And maybe these plants max out at a height of like 15 to 20 feet tall. And then you have a herbaceous layer, and this would be the woodland perennials that cover the forest floor. And the fifth and also very important layer is the leaf litter layer. But unfortunately, when I hike around a lot of New Jersey, I only find pockets of healthy forest like this. What I often see are forests that look like this. And notice there really aren't those 5 layers at all. To me, when I look at this picture, I see the canopy and I see a leaf litter layer, and I don't see the other layers in between. Part of the problem is that our deer population is completely out of control. It has been estimated that in order for our forests to be able to regenerate, so make babies and have the community keep going endlessly, that the deer population needs to be less than 15 deer per square mile. Most of New Jersey is experiencing a deer population that is more than 100 deer per square mile. And so when we see forests like this, the sad thing is that they won't last. I mean, how can a community last if they can't reproduce? If they can't have viable babies, then too grow up to be adults. I also see pockets of open space that look like this. And of course, this is wintertime, right? But this is an area that once was a wooded area, but then got overrun by exotic invasive vines that originated as garden escapees. And this is the perfect example of an invasive species acting like the plastic cancer, because not only does the plant not interact with other living things in the system, it literally pulls trees down and replaces them, the functioning species, with the plants that don't provide enough food. And just kind of like as a comparison, here's a picture of a relatively healthy forest in the wintertime, and again, one that's been overrun by invasive species. I mean, you can't on the right really even call that a wooded area anymore. And so I think it's safe to say that this model, as Doug Talame so eloquently has said to us before, that this model of having nature live over here and we live over here just isn't really working. Creating preserves where nature can be somewhere else, but not in our own backyards, it is not working, like I said. And the reason that it's not working is because biodiversity is tanking. Some really depressing statistics about this. These come from NatureServe, and so they're based on the United States alone. 34% of plant species, 40% of animal species at risk of extinction. I'm sure most of you have heard this statistic before. Since 1970, North American bird population has shrunk by 2.9 billion birds. It's an enormous amount. You know, these days we hear the word billion said a lot, way more than we used to. And so I feel like it kind of has taken the oomph out of the word, right? But 3 billion is a lot. To put it into perspective, the human population globally was 3 billion in 1960. Now, if you're too young to have seen 1960, or you don't really remember, if you're like me, you might be watching Mad Men, and the first season of Mad Men took place in 1960, so a long time ago, but not really that long ago. And could you really imagine some force wiping out the entire human population in 1960? It's a very large number of individuals. And what are the causes of this loss? Of course, the number one cause is just outright habitat destruction. But the number two cause is invasive species. And here's the good news, right? The good news is that you're here. The good news is that we're here together and that we can be part of the solution. And the solution can happen right in your own backyard. Sometimes I get overwhelmed when I drive around and I see the dysfunction in the open spaces that exist in my community. But you know what? In my backyard, I have control. I can plant native species. I can manage my property in an ecological way and promote as much life as possible. And the more of us that do that, the bigger impact we're going to have. And so pollinator gardens are great. Thank goodness they've become so popular. They've popped up all over the place, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful thing. But we need to do more. It's just like the first step. Because probably monarch butterflies being one exception. But most of the pollinators that we plant our pollinator gardens for can really only use those gardens as adults. They don't necessarily provide the food that their babies require. Many of our native pollinators, their larvae need native trees and shrubs to feed off of. And so my first step in ecological gardening is replacing as many of your non-native trees and shrubs with native species as much as you possibly can. And I know that that can be a very big ask. So take it one step at a time. Start in an area of your yard that's covered in lawn and plant a native tree. And then plant some native shrubs around it. Maybe try to create a little forest island where you mimic those five layers in this one little garden. Again, I don't have time to profile plants for you. I wish that I could, but I would just say that when I look for inspiration, I use these two books, Landscaping with Native Trees and Flowering Shrubs and Small Trees. The Flowering Shrubs book is not exclusively native, but it certainly covers a ton of beautiful species. If you're going to start planting trees, you absolutely positively have to protect them. We planted this pawpaw a few years ago at Deep Cut Gardens, and we kept that ring around it for a few years, 2 or 3 years. And now it's probably almost about 15 feet high. So it's above the browse line. The browse line is usually about 4 feet high. All you have to do is drive around and wherever you see um, Atlantic white cedars and how they kind of look like lollipops, that's the browse line. But even when your trees get a little bit taller, when fall rolls around at the end of the summer, you are definitely going to have to protect them against deer rub. You could protect your tree all summer long from herbivory. And if you kind of sit back on your laurels, one morning you'll wake up and you'll see that a male deer has rubbed his antlers all over the trunk of that tree and might have even killed it. I also kind of just by experimentation, learned that planting shrubs around trees is an effective way to at least provide some protection. So, this is a black gum, which admittedly is not a deer's favorite food. But what I did is I planted Virginia sweet spire around it. And instead of this little tree being stuck out in the middle of the lawn, where it sticks out like a sore thumb. When it was its smallest, it just hid within the vegetation surrounding it. Another step in ecological gardening is to provide shelter for species. And one super easy way to do that is just start adding logs to your gardens. Every garden I make, I find logs, I add them to it. Over the years, when I start to see that those logs are decomposing and breaking down, I go find some new logs and throw them in the garden. And where do you find logs? I don't know. Every fall, people throw so much wood to the curb. It's amazing. You can get all the wood that you need when everybody's throwing all of their at least in Monmouth County, the town that I live in, I can say this, but maybe you could go to your town dump. If they don't allow you to put the logs to the curb, you got to people take them to the dump. Go find some good logs, throw them in the back of your car, and then you can stick them into your gardens. Even on the hottest, driest days of the summer, you go into that garden and you pull away the mulch and you roll over the log, and underneath that log is cool and moist and definitely where you will find a ton of invertebrates hiding. And so logs have all these nooks and crannies and crevices for creatures to hide again from the hot sun or the cold temperatures of winter. How about you make a stick pile, a rock pile, or both in your yard? You have all these extra sticks. You don't want to take them to the dump? Then just make a stick pile somewhere. Put it to the back of the garden so you don't quite see it so much. This stick pile is at Deep Cut Gardens. And it's near the parking lot, but towards the back of this garden. And I would say, you know what, if you want to keep it looking neat, try to keep the orientation of your sticks going in the same way. And then that way it sort of keeps this pile looking neat. But this pile again is a spot that's cool and moist in the summertime. When the snow is on it, underneath of there is just a little bit warmer in the wintertime and definitely protected from the drying winds. This is a place for small predators to hide, like spiders, or maybe even if you're lucky enough, toads and garter snakes. And step three is probably one of the most important steps, and that's just let go. Let things happen. Try not to micromanage your garden so much. Go with the flow. You can do just enough to keep it looking neat and tidy without going overboard. When it comes to fall cleanups, forget about it. Don't even do it. I don't do fall cleanups at all. Keep your perennial stems in place. Some of these hollow stems are places where insects can take cover in the wintertime. If this looks messy and ugly to you, you can definitely just take your hands and, um, you know, pull your hand up the stem and get rid of the dead leaves. And then there are just a bunch of stalks that you can see right through, and they aren't really even that noticeable. Here are the seed heads. Keep the seed heads and the flower heads. This is New York ironweed, and I would argue that those seed heads are equally as beautiful as the flowers themselves. And I know this picture doesn't show it that well, but if you have any of it in your yard in the fall, check it out because once all those seeds leave, even that little disc that's left behind is quite beautiful. And it gives a place for the snow to land. So you have some winter interest. You have something to look at. I don't know, for me to go to from a garden that in August was overflowing and lush, maybe a little crispy, but overflowing, and then 2 months later cutting it all down to the ground, I don't know, that's just like totally depressing to me. When it comes to ornamental grasses, everybody was always taught that you gotta give them a buzz cut in the fall. I say no. Look at how beautiful that winter scene is right there. This is switchgrass, Panicum virginiatum. And if we gave, that's at deep cut too. And if we gave all of that grass a buzz cut, that beautiful winter scene would have never existed. Plus, underneath all that biomass are good hiding places to hunker down over winter. And again, when you leave the biomass, you leave the depth, you leave the interest. Just some more winter interest for you. But look at all that biomass that I left behind in that garden. And when you leave the biomass, you leave hiding places for predatory insects to make it through winter. So they'll be there in the beginning of the season to keep those pest insects under control. This is an orchard spider, and most spiders tend to overwinter as egg masses. And a lot of times these egg masses are attached to the perennial stalks that people have conventionally been cutting to the ground and carrying to the curb and dumping away. This is an anchor stink bug, and like stink bugs, it has a mouth part that it uses to pierce its prey, inject digestive enzymes, and then suck the juices out. This guy overwinters as an adult, and it hides under the debris that's left on the ground and the leaves and whatnot. So this guy needs that stuff left behind. Here's our native Carolina mantis, and they overwinter as egg masses that you could be again carting away. I have an example here of a brown lacewing. Here it is in its larval stage. And I don't know that these are brown lacewing eggs, but this is what lacewing eggs look like. They are on these long silken stalks. And I show you this too, so you put some effort into learning what these insects look like in all their stages of life. But depending on the species, lacewings will either overwinter as adults or as pupa. And I don't have a picture of a pupa, but again, if you're getting rid of all of your leaves and all of the biomass in your yard, you're most certainly getting rid of the pupa. I just want to say a quick word about native and exotic praying mantis for any of those of you who don't know. Here is an Asian praying mantis. This is usually what we see. They are all over the place. And notice how the wings go all the way back to the very end of its body. And you compare that to our native Carolina mantis and see how the wings stop here and then there's the rest of the body sticking out at the end. That's one big way that you can tell them apart. Their egg masses look a little bit different too. I'm sure you've seen these around. They're all over the place. And they have the same kind of consistency, sort of like a a spongy layered look to them, but the non-native one would be round and the native one is more oblong. I know of entomologists who say that we should be stomping on Asian praying mantises any chance we can get because they are exotic invasive species. I have to admit, I haven't been able to make myself do that quite yet. But if I find the non-native egg masses, I scrunch them up in my hands and I try to get rid of some of them that way. It's funny when you're a kid, the things you learn, like they really get ingrained in you. And I was always told never to kill them, so it makes it hard. Just some other beneficial insects that are worth recognizing. Here's a picture of a mud dauber wasp and the um, mud nests that she makes. This must have taken thousands of trips. They collect mud and sediment in their mouths, and then they deposit it, making these nests. And then she lays eggs within the nest, and the mud dauber uses spiders and she sticks that in the nest, stinging it and paralyzing it. And then when the eggs hatch, the babies have a fresh meal. So I'm telling you, you guys, if you're finding mud dauber wasps in your yard, you should be really, really happy because that is an apex predator. That is a predator of spiders who are carnivores. And the reason that I want to profile these species in particular is because wasps get a really bad rap. And these wasps are solitary. Um, excuse me. They're solitary. I don't know if you really should be too worried about getting stung by one unless you really mess around with it. But they're really, really helpful predators that keep pest populations under control. The potter wasp makes this really cool little pot, and she too comes back and forth, depositing more and more mud to make that little pot. And then she goes out and gets a caterpillar, brings it back, sticks it in the pot, lays her eggs, and then closes the pot up tight. There are grass carrying wasps who are who feed their young grasshoppers. And this female was making a nest at our lunch table at work, and we were eating lunch. And for days, we would sit and eat lunch, and this wasp would come and fly around us. And then we started watching her, and she'd go into that little hole, bringing another blade of grass, one after the other, one after the other. And then that's where she lays her eggs. And these are feather-legged um, scolid wasps. And I tend to unearth these guys when I do my spring cleanup in March. I often feel bad. I think I might be getting them out from under the ground a little bit before they want to. I don't mean to, but it seems to happen every year. But those wasps feed on grubs. And so if you have the feather-legged wasps in your yard, you probably don't have as much of a Japanese beetle problem. And a lot of the pollinators that we plant pollinator gardens for need overwintering sites as well. Again, just to show you the multiple life stages of some of these interesting organisms, here's an eastern black swallowtail. Here it is in its pupa stage within the chrysalis, and here it is as the larval caterpillar. This species overwinters as the chrysalis, and that chrysalis could very well be attached to the biomass, all the biomass that you're collecting together and blowing to the curb. This very cool butterfly, the mourning cloak, actually overwinters as an adult. And so it finds cracks and crevices within bark or cracks and crevices between rock. So if you make a rock pile, if you allow there to be logs in your gardens, you're creating overwintering places for these guys. I see them in April, and by that time, they usually look pretty beat up, but I'm sure they've been through a lot. But it's pretty cool in April to see a butterfly like that flying around. And even queen bumblebees, they hibernate underground, but they require a leaf litter layer above the hole that they make. So again, if you're getting rid of all of your leaves, you're not providing the winter habitat that they require. And look at this awesome lunar moth cocoon. So the pupa is inside. It spins silk all around itself. It takes pieces of leaves and attaches that to the silk for camouflage. If you are getting rid of all of the leaves that fall in your yard, that I don't know how you would ever be able to notice that you're getting rid of that guy too, but I don't know who wouldn't want to see that in their yard at night. And so keep your leaves. I know everybody's heard about leave the leaves, and it's a great idea. And so what I want to talk to you now about is share with you how I manage my leaves because I've heard people say, "Oh, leave the leaves." I guess that means you don't do anything, and that couldn't be further from the truth, right? Now, I'm sure all of us have some lawn, right? And you need to get the leaves off the lawn. The lawn does not appreciate it. It will suffocate. It will not do well. But any leaves that fall in your shrub beds, in your garden beds, just leave them there. I often I use all of my leaves. I'll get them off the lawn. I'll put them in other beds. I have compost bins. I shove them in there. Sometimes my yard doesn't even make enough leaves for me. I go and get leaves that my neighbors put out to the curb. This is a garden that we have at Deep Cut. This was not last fall, but the year before, and this garden was very new. Um, but look at how beautifully all the leaves just kind of fell in this nice, even layer. And it would be wonderful if it would just stay like that. But of course, it does not, because the winter winds have their way and they blow the leaves all over the place. And you end up with too many leaves in one place and not enough leaves in the other. And so here are some of the strategies that I use to make the most out of my leaves. First of all, if you keep all the biomass in your garden beds, they act like leaf catchers. And so all the leaves that land in those beds, they stay there. I'm actually happy to report that this is the first fall in forever that I didn't rake a single leaf. We have people come and mow our lawn. And so they came and mowed the lawn all fall long and obviously chopped up the leaves that landed on the lawn. But my garden beds are getting pretty old now. 9 years, 10, 15, some of them even. And so they're pretty well established. And like I said, I keep all the biomass there. So whatever landed in my gardens has just pretty much stayed there. Here's another garden in my yard, and I know this isn't the best picture, but what I'm trying to show you here is this is probably like in March, right? And there are a ton of leaves here. And of course, all of the leaves got blown up against this fence, and there's way more over here, hardly any over there. And notice that there aren't any leaves in the front of the garden. And so my advice to you is just go with the flow and work with it, right? You can't have too many leaves. too many leaves can be a problem in one particular spot can be a problem too because they can get too thick and when your perennials break through the ground and they're trying to reach for the sun, they can get kind of long and leggy. But so what I simply did one afternoon is I kept walking back and forth, this way to that way, this way to that way, and kicked the leaves that were too thick over here and spread them out all along the back of the fence over here. And then I had sticks in my yard from a branch that fell down. And once I spread the leaves out, I took those sticks and I strategically placed them on top of the leaves. So whatever winds came around in March, before the new plant life could grow and hold them in place, they would stay put. And then I said to myself, well, why don't I just make a stick pile? So I had some really big branches I needed to get rid of. I broke the sticks up into smaller pieces. I created this stick pile and it helped keep all those leaves in place. And then, of course, created some habitat on its very own. You might be saying to yourself, man, that looks totally messy, right? But you know what? Maybe when you're standing on top of it like that, or I could say to you, it doesn't look messy. It looks like habitat. That's what I see. But look at what it looks like from my house. Here's the sticks. These are the leaves. And I don't know, you guys, to me, that doesn't look messy. Here's another stick pile that I made on the other side of that garden too. And wouldn't you know it, within 24 hours, the next morning, guys, I was at my kitchen window getting ready for work, and I look outside and I see a pair of Carolina wrens sunning themselves on the stick pile that I made the day before. And for about a week, they would sit there in the morning, they would sun themselves, and then they would use that as a jump off point to go hunt for whatever they were looking for in the leaves that were on the ground. This is the same garden in June. I don't know, if I didn't tell you there was a stick pile there, would you even know it? And when you leave the leaves in the garden, who cares what it looks like in the wintertime if there's some leaves on the ground? Just know that not only are you doing the right thing for habitat for other animals in your yard, but those leaves break down and make the soil better. And it's what the plants want you to do too. Plus, once the plants start to grow and expand and get bigger, you don't see any of that stuff. You just see healthy plants. Here's that garden that I showed you before in the fall at Deep Cut. We were standing over here and it was like nicely covered with leaves. Look at what happened to all of those leaves over the winter. They kind of all sort of got aggregated near the tree, and probably because that's where I put logs when we built that garden. And so again, go with the flow. If the leaves want to collect in a particular spot, let that happen. And then if other places are bare, then you can use store-bought mulch to finish off the job. I intentionally made this look like nooks and crannies, sinuses and lobes, because I wanted to give it kind of more of a natural feel. And guys, it's okay to have zones in your yard, zones in even one garden where you allow the leaves and all of that stuff to collect towards the back of the garden where you don't really see it. And then in the front of the garden, you have more of a classic look where you just mulch the front where your annuals are and stuff. I will say that because this garden is young and new, I'm really, really hoping that over the years, as the plants get bigger and they produce more biomass, that of course, I'm not going to cut down in the fall, that this garden's ability to trap leaves will increase over time. Here's the other side of that garden. And I just wanted to show you again. Here's where all the leaves wanted to collect. Notice I put logs in when I planted these plants. And you can do it in a way that makes it look like a garden feature. So I put this log here. This is celandine poppy. I planted one right behind it in the hopes that eventually the plant will get big enough that it'll sort of like spill over the log. And then what I wanted to show you in the front here, pardon me, what I wanted to show you in the front here is even though I mulched this area, which is crested iris, there was no there wasn't a good amount of leaves, so I needed to use some mulch. But whatever leaves were there, I just let them stay there. And I put mulch over top of it so that it had a continuous, neater look to it. And here's another little spot in that garden where, again, those logs that I put down acted like a leaf trap. And I didn't want to remove all that stuff. This is really great habitat for invertebrates right here. Not only can they hide under the logs, they can rummage around through the leaves in here. And I'll tell you, later on that year, that growing season, when I did work and I had to like move mulch around to weed or whatever it was, when I moved the mulch around, there wasn't really much life under that mulch. Anywhere where I had to move leaves around, there was life all over the place. Insects like leaves way more than they like mulch. And when you leave the leaves, again, it acts, it breaks down, it decomposes, it adds nutrients to the soil, it adds organic matter to the soil, and it feeds the soil ecosystem. I do not have time to get into the soil food web or anything along those lines, but I highly, highly recommend that you go to symphonyofthesoil.com, and there you can rent for about $5.99 a documentary about organic gardening and soil. And when I watched Symphony of the Soil for the first time, I was already an organic gardener, but watching that made me see soil in a whole new way. It's definitely one of my favorite documentaries. So, to that end as well, um, try to find a place in your yard where you can set up a composting system. And whatever, if you don't have room in all of your beds for the leaves, then put them in the compost bins. But compost is such a valuable resource. We use it all the time. This is the composting system that we have at work. And I just want to show you this quick video. Last 2 Decembers ago, I guess, I was brushing my teeth. I looked out my bathroom window and look at what I saw in all of the biomass and the leaves that I left behind that fall. Now, I'm not trying to say that there's this vast array of bird species in my yard. I live in suburbia like you guys, right? So it's sparrows, it's robins, but look at all that activity. Look at what they're doing. They're hunting in the leaves. Leaving all that stuff gives a place for insects to hide, which in turn gives food for the birds. And so when you leave the leaves, you provide hunting places for songbirds. When you provide hunting spaces for songbirds, you provide hunting spaces for hawks, like the sharp-shinned hawk that I took that picture basically right where that cardinal was sitting also. I don't think it was eating the cardinal because the feathers were all gray and brown and everything, but it was literally under the same hedge where I allowed the leaves to just stay. And now I want to give you some other suggestions. Using different types of mulch instead of the store-bought stuff. Bales of straw, bales of hay. Everybody always corrects me, but this is just the bales of straw that people use for decoration around Halloween and Thanksgiving. I'm the weird lady who drives around after Thanksgiving and collects the bales of hay that people throw to their curb. I collect 6 to 8 every year, stack them in my yard, kind of let them rot and decompose over the winter a little bit because there are a lot of weed seeds in there. And when you let that happen, the seeds tend to have a chance to sprout before you spread them around. And then when you spread them around and you see these sprouted seeds, you can just sort of rip them up and kill them that way. Sometimes I have to weed things out, but you got to weed stuff out anyway, guys. And so here's that garden where I used straw over here. I just want to show you that I left all the leaves and I'm just adding the mulch on top. And this is the same garden, but in different years, right? It's kind of hard to do everything all at once. But look at this. I haven't finished mulching, but here's that mulch layer with the straw. I don't know about you, but that looks just as nice as store-bought mulch to me. I love pine needles, you guys. I would mulch with pine needles all the time if I could get my hands on them. I'm also the weird lady that as soon as I see a pine needle pile go to somebody's curb, I go pick it up the next day. I try to do that really, really fast though, because the longer it stays there, the more apt dogs are going to be peeing on it. And that doesn't really appeal to me. But pine needles, oh my gosh, they're so lovely. They look beautiful. They make the darkest healthy soil. Um, Spring cleanups. Be a minimalist. Here's a garden in my backyard, and obviously that is before the spring cleanup, right? But again, look at all that biomass. Then when I go in there, I try really hard to wait until there's 3 consecutive nights in the 50s before I go in there and start to clean things up. And what all I really want to do is cut back all those perennial stems and clean it up that way. But I don't want to cut them all the way to the ground. I cut them anywhere between a foot and 18 inches long. And I try to vary it. I try to be random. Trust me, I don't go out there with a ruler or anything like that. But these perennial stems are hollow, and there are solitary native bees that lay their eggs in those stems. You could make a bee hotel, but one of the downsides to that is all of the eggs, everybody's kind of found in one very obvious place. And when you just sort of leave more natural habitat behind, the predators don't get to as many eggs because they have to spend more time looking for them. Don't worry about bugs eating your plants because that's what's supposed to happen. This is swamp milkweed, and every year this swamp milkweed gets covered in aphids. And guess what? Every year it flowers beautifully. And of course, you'll find milkweed bugs within that milkweed as too. This is a picture of pink turtlehead, which is not a New Jersey native. It's native to more southern Appalachia. But notice how all the leaves are chewed up and, you might say they look awful, but this just looks like the plant is doing its ecological role to me. And if you look at this is the same exact plant, same day, but like 3 or 4 feet away. And from this angle, you don't really see anything wrong. And later on in the fall, it still will flower beautifully. And just to show you some quick examples of a garden in my yard. So this is my backyard, right? Wintertime. close up all that biomass and everything before the spring cleanup, after the spring cleanup, but now we're looking in the other direction. So I'm keeping the stalks. Notice I didn't get rid of any leaves. I like using tomato cages around my perennials, like my New England aster and stuff like that. It helps them from not flopping down. Here's a little bit later, maybe in May, and notice now all the perennials are getting tall enough that you don't even see those stalks that I left behind. This is I don't maybe this is July. I don't know. Do you see any stalks? Do you see any leaves? I just see pretty flowers. And then this is the same garden in October. And I just want to show you one more garden because that one's in my backyard, right? It can look any way I want it to. This one, well, they all can look any way I want them to, but this one is the garden that's right by my front door. And so I do keep it a little bit neater, right? And it's okay to have zones. But of course, that was in February. This is in January, or sorry, the other way around, January. This is February before any cleanup. This is post cleanup. But notice I didn't like get rid of any leaves or anything like that. A little bit later on, maybe this is April now. Now we're getting into May, June, July, August, right? And so I don't know. I'm proud of that garden. Another thing to think about is if you're going to invite all of this stuff into your yard, you want your yard to be a safe place. And oh gosh, the light pollution is just getting worse and worse around here. And light pollution kills. So try to follow these three rules. Keep it low, keep it long, keep it shielded. Keep it low, meaning that light source should be as low to the ground as it possibly can and still be functional. Keep it long means use long wavelengths. Try buying those yellow bulbs. The yellow color is so much softer. It doesn't travel as far. It doesn't attract as many insects, but it still lights the way. And then shielded just makes the light face down to the ground where it's helpful and not harmful. Look at the activity center at oh gosh, Death Valley. This is in 2012 before they did wildlife lighting, right? And this is in 2013 after they made it low, made it long, and made it shielded. What a difference. And this is a public place. It has to be safe. And so I have no doubts that when people are walking near these buildings, they can see where they're going, but it just doesn't spread out to where it wasn't needed. Try to protect the birds, guys, from window glare. People estimate that 1 billion birds a year are killed by smashing into windows. This is the window to my side yard. There's that stick pile's like right over there. And I just got these decals off of Amazon, and I don't know, I kind of like the way they look. And birds used to bang into that window all the time, and it's not a problem. If you don't like that, you can get these dots and you can really just sort of see through them. I don't know. I couldn't install that. That would drive me crazy. And then the proof is just kind of in the pudding, right? Like these are creatures that live in my yard, predators that live in my yard. This garter snake was born in my yard, and I know that because I found its sibling, unfortunately, dead in the grass and it got run over by the lawnmower. And a few days later, I found this guy. Gray tree frogs. I hope I can get this to her. I'm not going to do that, but gray tree frogs. I hear 2 or 3 in my yard every night. Eastern toad. Oh my gosh, I went to go transplant some daffodils, and when I dug it up, there was this disgusting gelatinous thing on my shovel, and I was like, what the heck is that? And it turned out it was a toad. I just want to say this is my last thing to talk about because I know I'm going a little over, but people have this misconception that if their yards are sterile, and this is pretty sterile, right? This is, a typical yard, very neat, very well kept, but pretty sterile. That yard is safer from ticks and Lyme disease, but it's really not true. If you want to learn more about this, be sure to register for our annual meeting in March because Dr. James Shepard is going to be talking about this and more, how biodiversity impacts human health. And so the idea behind it is the tick lifestyle is they hatch from eggs, they go find a blood meal, they get engorged, and then they morph and they become nymphs. And so the point of the matter is that with they take a meal each life stage. And so one tick only has 3 meals in its life. And if you only have deer and mice living in your yard, then your chances of getting Lyme's disease are actually going to be a lot higher than if you have deer and mice and possums and all kinds of things. So the idea is that the more biodiversity there is surrounding us, the more hosts there are for the tick to latch onto. And some of those hosts are dead end hosts, right? Like reptiles are dead end hosts. Ticks will bite reptiles, but their blood does not carry Lyme's. And so that is a dead end. A possum eats about 5,000 ticks in a season because any tick that attaches to them when they groom themselves, they eat it. And because of their immune system, maybe only about 50% of the time when they have Lyme within their body, will they spread it to something else. Okay, and here are my references. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you learned some stuff.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kate. I think we're going to go to the Q&A. So if anyone has some specific questions, please type those in. I have to say, my main takeaway was my new catchphrase to yell at people when they complain about my yard. It's not messy, it's habitat.
Good.
I'll let you know how that goes.
Okay.
I think maybe I'll just get a sign and put it out there next to the Audubon certified wildlife garden. I think I'll get some reaction. So, okay, I'm gonna turn this over to Drew. Any questions, Drew?
Yeah, I've got a few of them. So one question is, doesn't composting kill the larva? So if you were to leave the leaves in place, would that affect the larva of insects and all that?
Oh, well, I mean, if there are any larvae mixed in with the leaves, um, it takes a while for leaves to compost, right? Like
Mhm.
a long time, whether it's in your compost pile or in your garden bed. So I think the fact that you're moving them from one point in your yard and putting them somewhere else, like in a pile behind your shed, I mean, maybe it could be a detriment to the larvae if they were at the very bottom of the pile, but I don't. Again, it takes leaves a long time to decompose, so I don't see that as necessarily being a problem. And at least
Okay.
you're keeping those leaves in your yard. So when do you mean like the pupa instead of the larva? I'm not sure,
I,
but
yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure the intent, but I'm assuming like the eggs and any sort of
well,
juvenile
I will
insects.
say, with that 3 bin system that you have, I have that one at home. And
Mm-hmm.
so the way that that works is you always put your fresh stuff in the bin on the far left, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then after about 6 months, whatever's in that bin in the far left, you use a shovel or a pitchfork and you put it into the middle one, right? And then the next day when you come out with your kitchen scraps, it's still all the new stuff still goes into the bin in the far left, right? And then 6 months later, whatever's in that middle bin, you again take your pitchfork and you throw it into the bin on the far right. And then that's basically when it becomes compost that's ready to use. And that compost has a lot of life in it. Whenever I go to turn my compost piles around, I find spiders, I find salamanders, I find enormous earthworms. It's full of life. So again, I don't see that as being a problem. Plus,
Yeah.
when fall rolls around, all those leaves that I use, I put them on top of all of that that's in the process. So only the leaves that end up in that far left channel would get more stuff thrown on them. The other ones just sort of remain leaf piles on top of the compost that's cooking underneath.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because I know that whenever I dig in my compost bin, there I'm always finding every little bit of life.
Oh
That's
yeah,
the
no, it's
most.
full of life, full of
Yes.
life.
So I can't imagine it would hurt. I mean, unless you have a really hot compost bin going.
Yes,
But
I mean,
yeah,
that's true. I'm definitely only working with cold compost
yeah,
piles. You have to use manure in order to get anything to be hot, and I don't have access to that. So
yeah,
I guess if you were doing a hot pile, then yes, it would kill the larva. But in all honesty, if those larvae end up in the compost pile, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody ended up eating them anyway.
yeah.
Like maybe the spiders or the salamander or whoever else is in there.
Hmm. Okay, so I had a question here regarding the forest, and this might be a potentially controversial question, but you were talking about how the deer population is overrunning the forests,
Yep.
um, preventing shrubs and that under lower layer of forest really to taking hold. Um, so thoughts about maybe reintroducing some predator species, maybe some apex predators into maybe some of these preserves, some of these larger parks and all that.
On paper, I think that's a great idea. Um, to get the rest of our community to agree with it. I don't ever see that happening.
Yeah.
I know from Facebook that I see people freak out when they see a fox in their yard. They write stuff like, "Get your dog inside. There's a fox in the neighborhood." And it's like, "Oh my gosh, guys, the fox is probably 10 pounds wet. Like, don't worry about it." So, I without ever living with wolves, I like the idea of it, but I don't know what it's like to live with wolves. So
Yeah.
I'm not an
Yeah, that's a
expert.
great question coming from, essentially city folk and suburbanites, yeah. It sounds great. I don't know what that really actually means in practice.
I mean, but there are coyotes. They exist around here, but um yeah, I mean, the human population just needs to take control and we just need to do what we need to do to cull the population. And I know a lot of people don't like to hear that too, but um, the alternative is our ecosystems are falling apart. The deer's ecosystem is falling apart too.
Mm. So, I mean, I guess on that note, what steps would you take to maybe, aside from maybe controlling the deer population, by whatever means, what steps do you think that we should be taking to reintroduce some health into the forests?
Well, getting well, I feel like part of the onslaught is the deer population, and the other onslaught is these open spaces are being overrun with non-native species, and those non-native species are coming from our yards. And so It's again about flipping the coin and repopulating all of our backyards with native plants, and that will provide the habitat for native species. And I mean, it's a dream, but if it took off and, 100 years from now, everybody's yards were native, which isn't going to be the case, but you can dream, right? If everybody's yards were native, then maybe those open spaces would get overrun with native propagules instead of all this non-native stuff.
Mm. So it really starts at home, essentially.
That's where you have the most control,
Yeah.
right? That's where you have the most power. That's for certain.
Yeah. Um, okay, so thoughts on you mentioned maybe having a spring cleanup in the garden. Would you say would it be detrimental to maybe never clean up? Just leave it completely go wild?
Gosh, I think that would be awesome. When I first started learning about this stuff, I don't remember who it was, but somebody said, I try to intervene in my garden as little as possible, as little as possible. So if you have a big enough yard that you can do that and your neighbors won't complain, I say go for it. Yeah, I mean, why not? The funny thing is too, I meant to mention it, but I did the spring cleanup and I had these penstemon flower stalks left over from last year. And I almost like cut them down like varying heights. And I was like, wait a second, no, don't stop. You gotta unlearn what you've learned. And like even somebody like me, sometimes I go in and I start cleaning and I'm like, whoa, Kate, stop cleaning. But I left those flower stalks because I thought it looked prettier that they were sticking up than having nothing at all. And then wouldn't you know it, later on that season, I went into that garden bed to weed and I saw spider webs connecting all those flower stalks from the previous year. So things would like to use that. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. I know that, in nature, no one's going around
I'm
trimming.
sorry, say that again?
I just saying that I know that nature, no one, in a natural environment,
Oh,
there's not a gardener coming along trimming
right.
down the stalks and all that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. No, it's just part of the process and then it slowly breaks down and adds organic matter to the soil.
yeah,
Of course, yes.
yeah. Um, so I think this might be the last question. So when you are creating a like a pollinator garden, kind of like the one you're, showing, how do you know that, is there any signs, I'll say, of that you've reached a sign, level of success, or, maybe it's time to keep adding more native species until you get to a point of a proper, ecosystem?
Well, one of the awesome things about gardening is that it never stops changing. The work never ends, right? But in a good way, because it's always in flux. Some things survive, some things don't, some things jump and move to somewhere else in your yard. And so, I mean, I think you know that it's working when you pull into your driveway and you look at your yard and it's vibrating with life. Like you stop and you don't get out of the car for a minute because there's a butterfly flittering over here, another one over there. And then when you go and you hang out in your backyard, hummingbirds are zipping around. And again, like if you're finding apex predators in your yard, that's an awesome sign because they can't exist in your yard if there's not enough food for them to eat, right? And so they're not for an apex predator, there just doesn't have to be um this is hard to explain, right? But there's got to be like if you think about if you thought about the African Serengeti, right? Like, how many zebras do you see? Thousands, right? But how many lions do you see? 30? I mean, I'm making up all these numbers,
Yeah.
right? But that's because where you fit in the food web, the ecosystem can support way more herbivores than it can predators. And apex predators are an even smaller group. So if you have them existing in your yard, it means you have a lot of secondary predators and then a ton of herbivores.
Mm,
But
mm.
there's always room for improvement, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's always it's kind of this never-ending path. You know,
Right.
you're always just kind of tweaking and yeah. Yeah, it's always evolving all that.
Yeah, and why wouldn't you want to try to add some new stuff when you can to
Yeah.
boost the biodiversity and and just to enjoy it, you know? I mean, that's the thing about ecological gardening, right? Like it functions ecologically, but it also looks really pretty too. And another cool thing about it is, you know, when people first get into gardening, their their world opens up, it gets bigger because now they recognize the plants and now individual plants have names and your world gets bigger. But then when you ecological garden, your world gets even bigger and even more beautiful because now you can appreciate and try to learn who they are, all this life that's using the plants that you've populated your yard with.
Yeah, I think it really gives you a perspective, you know, of your place that, you know, it's kind of nice to be able to see that food web, the ecosystem kind of building around you. I mean, I think
Oh,
that's a
no
really
doubt about it. It
satisfaction.
feels
Yeah.
good. It
Yeah.
feels great. And it like I said, it can be overwhelming when you think of bigger spaces, you know, 300 acres. How do you manage that? But, you know, I live on 3/4 of an acre. That's a lot to manage, but but anyway, it's doable, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that was the last question.
Okay.
So any final parting words you'd like
Oh,
to
no, not really, but I'm just very grateful that you guys invited me to come and talk about this. And thanks to everybody who decided to spend their Wednesday night thinking about this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
It was wonderful, a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
take care. Bye-bye.